Well, hello there, members and friends of Conversations on the Culture. My name is Paul Engel with the Constitution Study, and I will be your moderator for today. I am looking forward to the discussion we're going to have with Gregory Wrightstone on a topic that is both current and the source of a lot of confusion: climate change. Now, Greg is a geologist. He's studied Earth processes for over 35 years. His debut book, Inconvenient Facts, meant to challenge the inconvenient truths of Al Gore. He made it to number 13 on Amazon bestseller. He made it to number 1 in the environmental field. So he does a lot of work studying the scientific processes of the Earth. Gregory, thank you for joining us today.
Great to be with you, Paul. Thank you for having me.
I'm more than happy. Before we get started, can we let our guests know a little bit about you?
Well, I'm a geologist. I've been doing this for more than 40 years, studying various aspects of the Earth's processes. And I did not set out to write a best-selling book. Most books, you sit down and you say, I'm going to write a book. And I was really drawn into it. It was, in terms of climate change, I knew that as a geologist, there were some things we were being told about climate change that was just incorrect. I suspected other things were, but just like you and many of your viewers, I heard conflicting stories on both sides of the issue on various matters. So I really set out in an exploration, a search for the truth. And it was that search for the truth that led me to some shocking realizations. Many of those things we're being told about climate change are just incorrect. They're just wrong. We find that actually what we're being told is exactly 180 degrees opposite of what the science, the facts, and the data tell us. And it was really, Paul, it was forest fires and drought that whenever I started researching those early on, and those two go hand in hand. You can't have forest fires without arid conditions. And what I found about forest fires was frankly shocking. We're being told flat out by many people, the UN, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the latest National Climate Assessment, all of those things state flatly that fires are increasing, and it's because of climate change, man-made climate change and global warming. And what we find is, though, there is actually globally in North America and even in California, the number of fires have actually declined. Even in California, which is crazy. I didn't know that. I thought that forest fires were increasing because we hear it all the time when fires are raging. Even in California, the number of fires has declined by almost 50% over the last 30 or so years. And now the area burned has increased, but that is not due to global warming or climate change. That's an entirely forest management issue. We see that the forest management practices have changed over the last 40 or 50 years that have led to, according to the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, there are 5 to 6 times as many trees per acre as a healthy forest would have. So what's that do? That means more fuel.
Right.
So the fires are more intense. But think about, too, you don't really think about this. The second largest cause of soil moisture decrease, first is evaporation by far. But the second biggest one is the amount of water sucked out of the soil by plants and trees. Trees they consume huge amounts of water. And then as trees are using it in the process of photosynthesis, they're expelling, it's called transpiration. It's the process of breathing in and out, more or less. And when they bring in carbon dioxide into the plant, the photosynthesis process means that they exhale, if you will, transpire oxygen and water vapor. So by increasing CO2, plants don't need as much water. But again, if we have 5 to 6 times too many trees per acre, according to Sierra Nevada Conservancy, then what we have is that we see that the additional trees are competing for that same scarce moisture in the soil. which leads to more, even accentuates the arid conditions.
Right. So you end up not with more forest fires, but in many cases, larger, more damaging forest fires.
And more intense.
And the fact that we are moving more and more residences into these forested areas, there's more property damage, which is a lot of what gets quoted in these situations.
There are three things. There are three things we need for a forest fire or wildfire. You need an ignition source. Well, we've increased that because we've moved, like you say, according to some studies, we've had a 1,000% increase in the people living in fire-prone areas in the western parts of this country over the last 50 or so years. Arid conditions are being accentuated and exacerbated by, like I say, too many trees per acre in the forest. And then we've got more fuel you need fuel. You need arid conditions. And again, we're exacerbating the arid condition by too many trees. So the fires, particularly in California, are probably twice as big as they've been. The average fire is twice as big as in the past, and it's probably a lot more intense due to those things we just talked about.
So I want to let our guests know that they can ask questions of Greg. Just place them in the comments. We'll try to make some time to get questions in at the end. There's a couple of things we want to talk about in this program when we have time. We've talked about the recent announcement of the Pope in support of carbon taxes and how, we need this. We need carbon taxes to help the poor and the needy. And you have a slightly different point of view of that, don't you? Greg, we've lost your audio. No. Well, I guess Murphy is in the house. Hopefully Greg will find out what happened to his audio. As I said, if you have questions, we're going to try and make some time for questions. Just place them in the comments. We will get to those. And we're still not hearing Greg. The wonders of live broadcasting, technical problems appear. All right, hang on a second, Greg. Why don't you? Yeah, we'll talk about his book. Well, let me see if I can do. Okay. What? Facebook there.
Hello.
Hey, we can hear you now.
Back into the Facebook there. Sorry for the vast throngs listening and watching this. For the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. It's our belief that we should use all of God's creation for the betterment of mankind and do it as good stewards. So that includes using things like bountiful, reliable, inexpensive fossil fuels to lift people up out of energy poverty. And we see that many of these people around the world that the Pope cares about, what his policies and his proposals will do. And bear in mind, the Pope, what the Pope wants us to do is go and follow the Paris Climate Accords or things like the Green New Deal. He wants a carbon tax imposed to force us off of fossil fuels. He believes that fossil fuels are harming the planet and leading to devastating climate change. But if we do that, the people that are being lifted out of poverty today, it's precisely due to inexpensive and reliable, abundant fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas. In addition, there's up to 1.6 million people every year that die an early death due to lung conditions, emphysema, lung cancer, that are related to cooking with either wood, many cases dried dung, in their own homes because they don't have things like propane and natural gas. And if they were able to get those in their own home, they would be spared up to almost 2 million people spared an early death because of that. And the Pope specifically wants to ban that. He wants to ban fossil fuels. He doesn't want them. So he's actually, his policies are actually proposing it's a regressive taxation scheme, and that means that energy prices would be higher for everybody significantly, and that affects the poorest among us the most, because the poorest among us use a higher percentage of their income for energy costs. And so I've seen as high as 50% increase that would punish the poor over those of greater means.
So the choice isn't between a smoking chimney stack and the solar panel. There are options in between that will help the poor but won't do so much damage or emit so much carbon dioxide, I guess is a better way to put it.
Yeah, and it's these dry dung and whatnot, they give off a lot of the particulates, and it's mainly the women cooking over inside their own homes using this, or outside over open pits where they're breathing a lot of this particulate matter that lead to an early death. So I think the Pope, like many others that have bought into this notion of man-made catastrophic warming, there's a lot of the inconvenient facts that he doesn't know. And there's so much apparently of what he does know or thinks he knows that's just wrong. And so it's really, if we can all benefit and the world can benefit from increasing use of fossil fuels and going toward the benefits of reliable, low-cost energy.
Right, because you talk about the history of the benefits of warming periods in history.
Oh, absolutely. That's a fascinating subject. A lot of people have told me that's the best part. They really enjoyed that part of the book. And my second book that I'm working on will be more fully explore the relationship. There's a strong relationship between the rise and fall of temperature and the rise and fall of civilizations during each of the past warming periods. If we look over the last 4,000 or 5,000 years since the first great civilizations rose up, we see that there have been 3 other warming periods. We are in a warming trend right now. It started over 300 years ago, though, long before we started adding much CO2 at all to the atmosphere, or any CO2. And each one of these previous warming periods, it was called the Minoan, the Roman warm period, the time of Christ, the medieval warm period. Each one of these warm periods was associated with the rise of great civilizations. Great technology arose during each one of these. The 2 first ones were correlated with what's called the Iron Age and the Bronze Age. And so these were civilizations. The reason these civilizations rose up, because during each one of these warming periods that were warmer than we are today, each of these warm periods had great amounts of food that could be grown. Crops were bountiful. Harvests were plentiful. There was plenty of food to go around, so people didn't have to worry about grubbing for their next meal. How were they going to feed their family tomorrow or next year? Because there was lots of food. So if you were Emperor Paul in a warming period, you had it pretty good. You could feed your subjects. I'm sure you'd be a good emperor. You could feed your subjects. But if you were Emperor Paul in a cold period, you started going into one, they were going to be getting the pitchforks out, and they're going to be sharpening the knives. You might be not be emperor for very long, because what happens in each one of these cold periods, the crops fail. We often see summers very cold with rain. Does that sound familiar from what we've seen here? But the summers were cold, lots of rain, crops failed. They couldn't harvest the crops. And so we had terrible conditions for crops. And so we had each one of the cold periods were related to crop failure, famine, pestilence, and mass depopulation. And in fact, in the last cold period, which is called the Little Ice Age, we see that we had 1/3 of the entire Earth's population is thought to have perished. Half the population of Iceland died. And these are all related to the cold. And we find too, just opposite of what we're being told, aren't we, Paul, that oh my gosh, oh my God, look out, we can't have more than 1.5 degrees warming, or all these bad things are going to happen. That's not what we've seen throughout history. We've seen, again, these warming periods be quite beneficial. With all the food, each person would have time to tinker, to dream, to invent, to sculpt, to paint. And that's what we saw. And that's when we see these, again, the medieval warm period was a time of the great cathedral building. It's called the High Middle Ages. Things went bad though when it got cold.
So all of these claims about mass extinction just aren't supported by the facts of history.
Right. And actually, the mass extinction is a great subject. Just 3 weeks ago, the UN released a report in which they claimed that up to 1 million species would go extinct over the next several decades. Well, I said, wait a minute. Excuse me. I said, I went back and looked at the same data. Well, if it's going to be 1 million species going extinct over several decades, that means necessarily that there would have to be 25,000 to 30,000 species go extinct per year. Well, I went back and looked at the same data. They had a chart in the UN report, and it was a chart that just showing extinctions screaming up and just accelerating. They looked at it though, and looked in the chart. They took 100 years. They went back to the year 1500, and they looked at 1 century for each data point, and it did it as a cumulative chart. Well, I went back and looked at it, the exact same data by 10-year periods. And what I found was that actually extinctions have been significantly in decline since the early 20th century, just opposite of what the report said. Absolutely. So we need 25,000 to 30,000 extinctions per year. Remember, I said, you know what the average was over the last 40 years? Two per year. Not 2,000, not 200, 2. And it's just crazy. And it's a use and abuse of the scientific process. And it's crazy that we see, they do this. I exposed this. Actually, I was the first person to identify the problems. And there was a hearing before the U.S. House 2 weeks ago, and Dr. Patrick Moore and Mark Morano both testified there, and a lot of those people used my data and in that hearing to debunk this claim of huge and ongoing what they call the sixth extinction, mass extinction. There's no evidence that's occurring, or will it occur? And it's, again, we see their abuse of the data in that was just a prime example of that.
And you mentioned you've brought this message forward. It has not exactly been accepted everywhere, has it?
No, what my claim? I mean, my debunking of that?
Yeah, your books and your apps have not exactly been.
Yeah, we had. I get a lot of abuse. I try not to go on any Facebook pages that are manned or dominated by what I call the climate alarmists. They're vile. They're hateful. They're not pleasant people, because anyone that dares question their religion of man-made catastrophic warming needs to be beaten down. We saw that first. We have our smartphone app that's It's it's both for Androids and iPhones. You can go to the Google Play Store or the App Store for Apple and search for Inconvenient Facts. Again, it's a powerful tool that you can use, get this information in the palm of your hands to give you that data. And that way, if your idiot nephew Billy, you're out to lunch or dinner, and Billy says, "Well, Uncle Paul, did you know the polar bears are going extinct?" And you can pull this up and go, "Wait a minute, let's look. Here's fact 52, inconvenient fact number 52. Here's 60 years of polar bear population history. Oh, well, what's the source?" And you can click here on source, and it comes up, oh, it's Susan Crockford, one of the most noted polar bear experts in the world. And actually, I talked with Susan while we were putting this app together to make sure we had the best and latest data actually on polar bear population histories. So it's a powerful tool for you to use for this, and I'd encourage everyone to get one. And again, let's go to.
But there was a time when you couldn't get it on the App Store, could you?
Yeah, well, that's where we're going. That's right. Here I got off on my polar bear and cousin nephew Billy. That's right. So we launched this. I launched this went down to Dallas to the Mercury Studios and was interviewed by Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck loves the app, by the way. And we had 16,000 downloads of the app just right away. And then soon afterwards, Apple removed the app from the App Store. And what they said was it lacked compelling content. Really? This thing is chock full. This should be the gold standard for every app. It's chock full of information.
Okay, I just lost your audio again. Facebook is being difficult today. Maybe Facebook doesn't want to hear you, Greg. Okay. I think he's going to drop out and try and connect again. Sometimes I just love technology. So yeah, as Gregory's coming back in, some of the notes he sent is, Apple decided that this was not compelling content, that it could be delivered other ways. I know of lots of apps that can be delivered via the web. In fact, several of the apps I use are a little more than web pages wrapped in an app, but they decided they didn't want, I guess they don't want them on the App Store. It is back. You can go to the Apple App Store and.
Am I back?
Get it back. Hey, now you're back, Gregory.
I'm sorry, I had to sign out completely and back in for you. It's nothing on the hardware here.
Yeah, Facebook. I was saying maybe Facebook just doesn't want to hear what you're saying. I was just telling our viewers that the app is back. It was basically was removed, they said, because you could do it through a web page, which is about 75% of the apps I use on my iPhone are a little more than web pages.
No, yeah, exactly. So we believe it was politically driven. We found out, of course, the name of the book is Inconvenient Facts, the science that Al Gore doesn't want you to know. Well, guess which 70-year-old vice president of the United States, former vice president, sits on the board of directors? Yep, Al Gore. Yeah, I didn't give you would have guessed it anyhow. So Al Gore sits on the board of directors. I think they wanted to shut me up, but they had to come up with a reason for taking the app down. And one of the reasons was it could be used as a web-based app. Well, yeah, you say most of the apps I use, that's the case. So we said, okay, what we did was add a feature where you can take a photo. It's stupid, but you can take a photo using your phone, using my app, take a photo, and at the bottom of the photo, there's a banner that says "I heart CO2." So you can't do that with a web-based. You can't take it with a computer. So we said, okay, this is an application we're using our app that's using your iPhone application and the functionality of the iPhone, and we got back up. But also, so we're back up and selling. It's been pretty brisk. We've got now over 27,000 downloads of the app to date. Wow. It's been 2 months. So this is all very recent. In addition, I got someone from my local area. I'm talking to you from the North Hills of Pittsburgh. Someone told me, hey, I tried to get your book at the Northland Public Library and they didn't have it. So I dropped off a couple here. Again, this was 3 weeks ago. And they contacted me, said, we don't want your book. Come pick it up. I said, whoa. So I appealed it. And then they came back and I got the books returned with a letter. The letter from the director of the library said, we value diversity of thought and diversity of opinion, but we're rejecting your book. So this is what book burning in the 21st century. This is the 21st century book burning is what it is.
Well,
banning my book.
The library obviously had dozens of books contradicting the current climate science. I use air quotes because they don't use a scientific method, but they've got that opinion already, don't they?
They do. They've got 20. I looked on their shelves whenever this first happened, and I looked. They had 26 books on climate change, and all of them towed what I call towing the company line, that it's primarily man-made and it's harmful, really harmful. My book, on the other hand, what I document is supportive of a naturally driven warming and temperature rise and fall, not primarily driven by increases in CO2. And I also am a huge proponent of rising temperatures and increasing CO2 being a very beneficial, having a very beneficial effect on both the earth and humanity. So you sleep well at night. You're not destroying the earth. The earth is what we call greening. According to NASA, up to 50% of the earth is what they call greening. In other words, it's vegetation's increasing. Less than 4% of the earth is what they call browning or loss of vegetation. So we see that it's just stunning. And you can, if you don't believe me, go to Google and just Google the two keywords, NASA and greening, and you can read all about it. And it's really a huge untold story. It should be the front page of the New York Times, but you and I both know that will never happen.
Yeah, because they want a diversity of opinion as long as it agrees with whoever's politically favorable at the moment. So I actually want to loop back a little bit, because the Pope is not the only example of some well-known person being used to pass along this propaganda without any scientific rigor behind it. You wrote an article about Greta Sundberg, but I also think all the other people, the celebrities and the politicians who put out this information without any, again, that information behind it.
Yeah, if you don't know who Greta Thunberg is, she's the 16-year-old activist that's led a school strike for climate change. She started last year in standing outside the Swedish legislature, and she said she was going to go on strike until they actually made meaningful climate change legislation. But she's representative of a lot of people. I went to my local food store the other day, and outside there were two young ladies that wanted to get me to sign up for for clean energy, no carbon. It was wind energy, and I talked to the one girl, and I've talked to some of these people before, and surprising. Again, I pull out my app usually, and when I talk to these people, are really interested. They go, I didn't know that. And I started talking with this girl, and I gave her my card. And of course, on my card, it's got the name of the book. And she looked at it and she says, who's Al Gore? I said, you don't know who Al Gore is? And she looked at me like that and she goes, no. And she was serious. Mm-hmm. So at that point, I'm not going to waste my time talking to this young mind full of mush. I could have, some of the other ones like that I've talked to are very receptive. There's one guy every day in the same store that's usually parked there. I gave him a copy of my book and he loved it. And every time I come in, I sometimes have my I Heart CO2 button on, which is pretty cool. I don't have them. They're not. I was going to pull one out to show you, but it's. I've got some cool bumper stickers and some I Heart CO2 stickers. So If you see a white SUV driving through your neighborhood with an I Heart CO2 bumper sticker on, that's me.
Well,
I haven't had my tires slashed yet.
Mrs. Thunberg said that we are facing the biggest crisis humanity has ever faced, but then she admits that she's not a scientist, that she does not have the proper education. My question is, then why should I listen to you?
Yeah, she's again, she's representative. She doesn't know. There's so much she doesn't know, and just like the Pope, there's so much that she thinks she knows that's just wrong. And it's hard to compete against that. It's hard to get the message out. I'm trying to do my best. I testified in Pennsylvania State Capitol, Harrisburg, over the last 60 days to both the House and the Senate. The House testimony was good. I had 30-minute a hearing where I spoke for 30 minutes, and we had 30 minutes of Q&A. That's at my website, inconvenientfacts.xyz. You can actually see a video of that House hearing. There was a Senate hearing I testified at. I testified there along with climatologist David Legates and meteorologist Joe Bastardi. But again, we're trying to get the word out there. I'll be appearing, hopefully coming up here. New York State has a climate change proposal that they're just getting worked on. Excuse me. And I've also been just finished an article I wrote on the Oregon climate change action proposal.
So our time is up. We're actually running just a little bit over, but it's been a great conversation. It reinforces to me the idea that facts need to supersede opinion, and that just because someone states it's a fact really doesn't mean it's a fact. If we want to have policy that's going to work, it has to be based on real science, which is based on the scientific method, which pretty much by definition means the science is never really settled. So as we're learning more about this, I hope we'll have you back and learn more about the real facts about what we now call climate change, that we used to call global warming, that I'm old enough to remember when we called it global cooling. And yes, you have your book. We certainly want to send people to read your book, to download your app from the App Store or Google Play, to head over to your website. It is some very interesting information. A quick closing comment before we close the broadcast.
Yeah, I'd encourage people to learn, get the facts. I've been told by people I respect, I'm gonna give myself a pat on the back here, that this is the best book on climate change that they've read. And these are some people like Ken Matthews that sits in for Rush Limbaugh. He's a huge reader, and he's really big on the climate change. He has stated on his show several times that this is the best climate change. It's readable and it's approachable by people. So I'd encourage you to get the book and get the app for sure. That's what because it's a powerful tool that puts this information in the palm of your hand.
Well, thank you very much for your time. Those of you who've been watching, thank you. You can contact us through the website or through this page. I'm glad you spent some time with us today. I hope you have a great day. Greg, thank you again very much. I look forward to having you back to learn more about the real science behind what's happening in our climate.
Thank you.
Thank you.